Maybe you're wondering, do I have to kill my fescue in order to plant native warm season grasses? Can't I just go overseed like I do with my clovers? Can't I overseed the native warm season grasses? Well, the short answer is it's usually not super successful. It's really best to kill the existing vegetation and then to plant what you want. However, if you want to do it, I can give you some tips and tricks that might improve your likelihood of success. So what we're going to do today is go over some of those tips and tricks, but also go look at this field with my husband Loren, who manages this field with cattle and goats. And we're going to go over what we did when we did that planting, how we did it, and again, just try to give you some tips and tricks if you decide to do this. So this planting we did in 2020, so the late winter of 2020, so it's now 2024. It's been through this is its fourth growing season that it's going through. What was the process that we did when we established it? We just throw the seed out here, or what did we do?
So I decided to try gamagrass here because on this farm there was some remnant gamagrass that seemed to be expanding on its own just through good grazing management. And also several years ago as I was growing up, we had an Eastern Gamagrass field on my dad's farm, and we'd mismanaged that with the grazing and let it get invaded by fescue and looked like we'd killed it. And then I started managing the grazing better, and we were able to bring that stand back to where it was a mixed stand of both gamma and fescue, and they seem to coexist together pretty well. And I feel like some of the others maybe don't do that as well as Eastern Gamma and fescue. So what we did is we came in and we grazed this down pretty short in the winter, and then there in late winter we came in and overseeded it. I believe a full stand is what we put on, and we did that with a no-till drill. It was a John Deere planter actually, and anyway, we put that on and then grazed it pretty short in the springtime. And then after that, we just went back to our normal grazing management, allowing adequate rest periods, trying to do things as well as we could.
Yeah, so you tried to stress that fescue, graze it as close as you could to give canopy once those seedlings germinated, to give some space to your seedlings. And then you tried to give it both long recovery periods after a graze and not graze too short so that hopefully you weren't grazing your seedlings off. Is that kind of...
That sounds correct.
Yeah.
And I have to admit that the first year I thought it was a total failure because I never found a single plant out here. Despite crawling around on my hands and knees looking, I could not find them. Depends on your measure of success, but I think it's been fairly successful if you didn't put time into the equation. It looks like we've got quite a bit of gamagrass out here, but it's taken 4 years to get here, and they're pretty small plants, a lot of them. This particular plant, which is one of the biggest ones out here, could probably still be 4 or 5 times as large as it is if it had not had the competition of the fescue.
Yeah. So from the forage production standpoint, like if we gathered all of these up and, you know, like it's not that many leaves. It looks impressive here, it's tall, but it's really not that much leaf material. Is that how you feel about it?
Yeah, I'd say so. And it did get grazed once this spring, kind of a moderate graze. Probably mid-April, we came in here and grazed this moderately and just for a few days and moved on. And then it's regrown, so we're a month or month and a half, probably about a month after that. This is the regrowth.
So the gamagrass would have been barely greened up, like just spears or something like that if it was greened up at all?
It was greened up. They grazed it down. They ate the gamagrass as well when they were here.
So it was in really early growth, something like this height?
Yeah, I'd say a foot high maybe.
Okay, and so they grazed it and the fescue down, and then you're giving it a long rest period now?
Correct.
Yeah. Are there any things that you feel like, because the gamagrass is here, that you manage it differently than you otherwise might if all other factors were equal?
I really don't manage it much different. I'd still the same things at play. Give an adequate recovery period before you return and leave some leaf on it when you graze it if you can. That is a little bit difficult with the gamagrass in here probably because the cattle select it out above the fescue, which contributes to its slow development, I would say. When we graze this, they tend to eat almost all of the gamagrass before they eat all of the fescue, so trying to pick your timing is a little more difficult. In a continuous graze situation or long grazing periods, it probably will not work. I'd say the plants won't survive.
So the planting that you grew up with of gamagrass that got encroached by the fescue and then you brought it back, what was the management that made that shift between those plants, if that makes sense?
Well, it was originally a good stand of gamagrass, and then we'd gotten in the horse business and we tended to use that pasture as the horse pasture while those mares were foaling out for months at a time. And anyway, they grazed it, overgrazed it, and it looked like it was about gone. And then after that, I went back to I gave it a full year's rest, and then I started giving it just adequate recovery periods between grazings. And it did come back to where we had a pretty good stand of gamagrass mixed with fescue at that point.
So you kind of started managing it for the gamagrass, even though you couldn't see the gamagrass. You managed it as if there was a nice stand there, is in essence what you did.
Right.
Okay, so you said earlier that we used a full seeding rate, so 10 PLS pounds, pure live seed pounds per acre out here, which in theory should give us a full stand. Like, that's enough seed to give us what you want on gamagrass is one plant every square yard. So we want one plant in here. In this particular area we're standing in, looks like it about has a full stand. This area back here, has nothing. So there's definitely a mix of that. What percentage stand do you feel like is out here on overall if we were to group it up?
Over the whole 15 acres that we planted, I think there's probably a 50% stand, but they're not really producing that well either with the competition of the fescue. So a 50% stand of poorly producing plants.
Yeah. Are the economics better of just killing the fescue and like having a really good, this could be producing a lot of gamagrass right now. We could have solid leaves across this thing that were pocket knife high. And I mean, that's going to vary for everybody in every situation, but what do you feel like for your situation here?
Yeah, I'd say the economics wasn't great as far as the return. And if you give it enough time, another 4 or 5 years, it may get pretty good, but you're talking about being 10 years deep into this before you've got really good production out of that gamagrass.
Yeah, so there's not only the poor production now and the management differences you're having to do, but there's that opportunity cost of not having the production, like what could we have been doing in the meantime kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So let's end this video with some tips and tricks that if somebody wants to do this, they understand that it's sure not a surefire way to get a stand. In fact, I often tell people when they call into the seed company, I'm like, there's a statistic, and I forget exactly what it is. It's like 80 or 90% of the time, if you do an establishment right, you'll end up with a stand. And I make up the statistic, and I tell them that. But it's if you do an overseeding, it's something like 0 to 20. And, maybe that's way too aggressive towards the negative side. Maybe it should be 50% success. But, I think there's a lot of factors that go into that are really beyond control at some point, right? So it's an experiment. If people want to do this sort of thing, we've got that friend, Steve, that he says, I don't have a bass boat. What I like to do is spend money on seed and experiments. And I mean, if people want to do that, how do they be successful with it, right? So I think one of those tips that I have, and you mentioned it earlier, is Eastern Gamagrass is often a good choice if you're going to do it. Or if you want to put some diversity into it, because diversity is always good, or do a little experiment with 4 different things, some switchgrass, big blue stem, Indian grass, Eastern Gamagrass in different areas, see which is most successful. But Eastern Gamagrass is often the one that works. You alluded to that earlier, and you mentioned that they coexist well together is part of it. But I think too, it's got a bigger seed. Those seeds are like a pencil eraser, and that seed just has a bit more energy to get above the canopy. Do you have any more thoughts on using Eastern Gamagrass or the other species?
Just my personal experience watching it, it seems like Eastern Gamagrass is the one that can coexist, and they play better together than most of the other natives. I've seen other natives, there's some on this farm, blue stem and Indian grass out here, and I don't see them expanding. There's a few isolated clumps, but that's where they stay, whereas the Gamagrass seem to be expanding on its own.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so one tip, use Eastern Gamagrass or do a diversity, whatever you want to do, but Eastern Gamagrass often is considered to be a more successful option than others. Another tip would be the management side of it, right? So grazing it really close. Go ahead.
So yeah, graze it down pretty short. You're trying to get that canopy down. If you can stress the plant a little bit.
And this would be the fescue canopy in like winter, right? Or very early spring.
Yeah, or even the previous fall. If you can stress that plant a little bit so that it's not taking off at its best, strongest point, and then stress it again there in the springtime as it starts to grow while your seedling is just germinating and starting to get going. That's your only opportunity. Beyond that, you're past. It's just you've got what you got. Then you just got to take care of your Gamagrass at that point.
Yeah. Or if you happen to have like a property that had been overgrazed severely in the past, like that's a good opportunity to do it if there ever was one, right? Because those plants are stressed.
I would think that would be a good time to do that.
Yeah.
I haven't tried that, but I think it would work.
Yeah. Okay, so start with, before you plant, stress the plant for as much as a full season, like graze it like the fescue shouldn't be grazed for as much as a full season ahead of time. But then especially getting it grazed down really close in that fall through winter, and like treat it as rough as you can, come back when you shouldn't come back. But then when they germinate, you've got to jump off. Is that, as far as like giving them a little space, getting more height, not grazing it down as close.
Right. Once that plant germinates, then you're trying to give the Gamagrass the advantage, and if they eat that little seedling plant off that's just germinated, that's going to be pretty rough on it. The other part of getting it grazed down short is you're needing to get seed to soil contact. The way we achieved that is by using a no-till drill or no-till planter, so that we actually planted it into the soil, that it made a cut into the soil to drop the seed in, versus just broadcasting it on top. Probably would not have been as successful when it's on top of a fescue sod, because it just has a hard time getting down there in the soil.
Yeah, so what we're really looking for there is seed to soil contact. You've got your soil, you need that seed in contact with the soil at a minimum. On the Gamagrass, you often should bury it ½ inch deep. So it is, but that's the exception. All the other native worm seasons are no more than 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. So it kind of depends on what you're planting. But if you were doing Gamagrass, probably drilling it is well advised, just because you can get down there and get that seed to soil contact, and because Gamagrass likes that extra depth. But if you're doing the others, you could either drill it or broadcast it, but what you have to have is seed to soil contact. If it's on, often there's some dead plant material down here on the soil, and so if it lands on top of that, we do not have seed to soil contact. So I think that's one of the big tips that people need to keep in mind as well.
I would agree with that.
Now, to monitor the germination, because we don't want to come back and graze too close. Once they germinate, we need to move to a taller grazing height. Something that you could do, we use this a lot for herbicides when you have a new planting, but you could also do it here, is what we call the black pot method, where you fill a flower pot with some soil, and then you do this when you're seeding your Gamagrass seeds, and you put some of your seeds in there, bury them at your ½ inch or whatever you're trying to replicate in the field, and then go put that on the south side of the house or whatever, where it'll get the rain and the wind and all of the elements, but that black flower pot heats up sooner. And if you get germination in there, you've got like a week, it always depends, but you can safely say you have a week to quit grazing so close out in the field. So that's a tool that people could use as well.
Right.
So we've got, you remember that pasture walk we went on up at Wardak Farm last year, where Gatlin was doing the bale grazing, which is, you know, of course, where they put the hay bales out there in the field and then use the poly wires and they graze them. And you do end up with a little impact zone right around that bale, but we're not putting the bale in the same spot every time. Is that a good explanation of bale grazing?
Yeah, they're kind of set out there on a grid more or less, and they move the poly wire around. It gets impacted pretty heavily right there around the bale. They're not unrolling the bale, they're just setting the bale out there and letting them eat it in one spot.
So he actually came in there at the extension farm and overseeded some native seeds. Switchgrass, big blue stem, I've forgotten exactly which ones, but he was feeling like, which it was a little early to tell, but he was feeling like he had some success with that. So that's something else people could do if they're bale grazing, is to do that. You have any thoughts on that?
I think it would work. It does a couple things. Is it gets seed to soil contact because you have a heavy impact zone around where they were feeding on that bale of hay, and that also beats the fescue back in that heavy impact zone, so that's what makes it have some success.
Yeah, a lot of times it's pretty, like the fescue is stressed nearly to the point of death in that impact zone right around the bale, which you get a lot of annual weed pressure then too. So it's not all, which you can manage that some with some high mowing or some grazing if the livestock are eating that. But again, lots of risk there.
Right.
Okay, one more tip is be patient. And you mentioned that earlier, that this has been 4 years to get where we're at. Year one,
I spent some time crawling around on my hands and knees looking, and I never found a plant that I was sure was a gamagrass that entire season. I thought it had failed entirely. And then, you know, took another year or two before I saw much, and it keeps getting a little better every year now.
I remember my dad saying one time that they had done an overseeding, threw out some seed and on a fescue pasture, and it was like 10 years later, they're like, where'd that native grass come from? And then they got to thinking back, oh yeah, like 10 years ago, we scattered some stuff out here. And so it's just like, you might not even see, you know, my dad knew how to identify a native grass, mind you, but you might not even see an inkling of a plant until 10 years. Like these have established really fast compared to that. So
Right.
Be patient is a big part of it, and keep it managing well while you're being patient.
Right.
I think one other tip and trick that I would have is like, know where you're headed. If you're gonna put the investment into this seed, we managed to do a nice one on this. We did this overseeding, and then we come along, and a lot of this was out of our control because the landowner was making a lot of the decisions. This is a rental pasture. But then we decided to come along and convert it to full-on diversity of native plants. And so then your establishment is a lot harder. So make sure this is where you want to be in the long term instead of changing your mind like we did.
Right. It kind of complicated our establishment as we took this to a diverse natives is what we're doing with it now. Not in this particular part of the farm yet, but on back further in there. And that took away a lot of options on how we could do that, and may make that a little bit less successful in the long run of the final product of diverse native planting.
Yeah. As I think about this, I'm like, you know, if people want to do it, it's definitely a tool that they can use to overseed natives onto a fescue pasture. Probably the weaker the plants, if you've been fertilizing a lot lately, may not be the best situation to overseed into. Those are just stronger, more robust, more growthy plants, more competition, if you will. But if people want to do this, it's definitely something they can do. But I think before you do it, to really think about, is this the direction I want to go, or do I want to just convert it? If you've got thoughts of just converting it and doing full on, you know, like the bison would have seen only native plants here instead of having the fescue mixed in, the time to do it is not now. The time to do it was 4 years later, or 4 years earlier when we were doing this. And there are different resources that people can get, like timelines to convert a fescue field to natives, whether that's only Eastern Gamagrass or whether that is diversity, on our website. So there's a lot of resources that people can use.
Right.
I'm Elizabeth with Hamilton Native Outpost, here with my husband Loren. It's been fun to do a video with him today. Here at Hamilton Native Outpost, we sell native grass and wildflower seed, but we really have a passion for sharing our knowledge that we've gained from the School of Hard Knocks with you so that you can have a successful planting.